I want to invite Gerald Blessey to come to the podium, and also want to invite the panelists, Keith Hurd, Robert Weigel, and Marlon Ladner, if you'll join me on stage. I'm going to turn the program over to Gerald to go through a few slides, and then I'll rejoin the panel, and we'll go through some questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks again for this opportunity for this very important issue to be brought to the business community. Many of you are already involved greatly. The mayors, Mayor Hughes and Jimmy, Mayor Rafferty, and all the others in the Board of Supervisors are very concerned about this issue. If you remember only one thing we say today, please remember this. The Mississippi Sound, as we know it, will be a Dead Sea within a generation if the United States of America does not change the way it manages the Mississippi River. I say the United States, not just the Corps of Engineers, but all three branches of our federal government need to pay attention to this. Now, I must say up front, our own delegation, led by Senator Wicker and Congressman Ezell, and all of our delegation, Senator Hyde-Smith, all four congresspersons, people, they are all 100% trying to help us with this, as is virtually all of our coastal delegation here in the state legislature and our local governments. This is a national problem that requires a national solution. We think there are win-win ways to protect New Orleans from flooding while preventing the Mississippi River from killing the Mississippi Sound. So our panel is going to elaborate. As I think we all know, in 2019, the Corps of Engineers opened the Bonnet Carré Spillway for 5 months, spilling 10 trillion gallons, actually over 10 trillion gallons of so-called fresh water into Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Borgne, and now the Mississippi Sound. I say so-called because it's fresh only in the sense of having virtually no salinity. But it is polluted water, polluted with nutrients from agribusiness and animal waste and runoff from 31 states in the Mississippi River Basin. So that spillway event in 2019 was opened twice, actually. Killed all the natural oyster reefs in the Western Sound. Mayor Rafferty knows this only too well, devastated the oyster industry in Pastures Jan and Bay St. Louis and so forth. It killed 10% of the dolphin population. Dr. Moby Salongi is here with us this morning. He is the chair of our Coalition Scientific Committee. And Moby is a world-renowned expert in this field. There is no question if this continues, the entire bottlenose dolphin population will become extinct. This is their home. This is their territory. They're at the top of the food chain. The oysters are at the bottom of the food chain. When you kill the bottom and the top of the food chain, the rest of it collapses. We're next. We're at the top of the food chain after these dolphins. This dolphin was alive when this picture was taken. It's the low salinity that causes these lesions. When you get below 5 parts of salinity per 1,000, oysters become dead, the reef's dead, and the bottlenose dolphins begin to get these lesions and disease. Even worse, if we can imagine, what happened in that polluted water is those nutrients fed algae. And in the warm summer months, that algae bloomed, and MDEQ took the precaution of closing the waters, which in effect closed our beaches, which in effect killed our tourist season for that summer. Now, just in 2019 alone, the cost of the seafood industry was $215 million, and about an equal amount to the tourism industry, which made our city and state sales tax take a dip, so we felt a tax decrease as well. It's about a $500 million hit. That's 1 year. We're still feeling that effect. Now, even worse, if you can imagine, there's an even greater threat looming south of New Orleans, halfway between New Orleans, the Bonnie Carey Spillway, and the mouth of the Mississippi River. The Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, CPRA, is planning the Mid-Breton Sound diversion, which on the eastern side of the Mississippi River will become a new spillway open virtually year-round, ostensibly so that the sediment from the river will build the Louisiana marsh up, which needs to be rebuilt. It's an admirable goal. But it's the same so-called fresh water that Bonnie Carey is putting in, and our scientists, Dr. Paul Mickle is here, the head of the National Northern Gulf Institute, headed by Mississippi State and USM, great scientists, the USM scientists at General Spraggins and DMR's request, did a study about the Mid-Breton Sound, and this one slide kind of sums it all up for me. That beautiful blue water all across the Mississippi Sound, all the way to Mobile Bay, the USM science study shows what that stands for, as pretty as it is, what it means is it's no salt, it's fresh water. And when the fresh water becomes year-round, no salt, this will no longer be a brackish estuary. It will not be the great food-producing combination of nursery ground for shrimp and everything else. It will be a so-called freshwater, maybe not even an estuary because it'll have all that pollution in it. It'll certainly have a lot of algae. This is an enormous, potential, colossal, permanent disaster looming, and we must oppose this Mid-Breton Sound diversion as it is presently proposed. Now, thanks to Senator Wicker and Senator Hyde-Smith and Congressman Ezell and all of our delegation, when we appealed to them after 2019, we, the coalition, which is, by the way, the cities and county governments and the Commercial Fisheries and Hotel and Lodging Association, basically, the response was to compel, the Congress adopted an amendment to the Water Resources Development Act to require a 5-year, $25 million core study on the lower Mississippi River comprehensive management. And for the first time in that law, it says you, the Corps, must look at your river water impact on the Mississippi Sound, and says that our coalition must be stakeholders in that discussion. Now, the first series of meetings that the Corps is going to be having on this subject will be in Bay St. Louis next Tuesday from 2 o'clock and at 6 o'clock. And we invite all of you and your friends and members of your community, your companies and so forth, to urge people to attend and be heard. This is an opportunity for us to say, rethink these things. Let's look for win-win solutions to the Bonnie Carey and to the Mid-Breton and to all the other subject matter. The panel has a lot more to say on this. Jamie, I'm going to call you up now and ask you if you'll take over. This distinguished panel, Jamie will introduce and will ask his questions, and we'd be delighted to have questions from the audience. Jamie.
Gerald, thank you for that introduction to the issue we're trying to address. I've asked our panelists to come up here, but if you don't know these gentlemen, Marlon Ladner, who's coalition chair, also serves as Harrison County Supervisor District 3 Board President. Marlon, Robert Weigel, lead Coalition Environmental Counsel. Thank you, Robert. Keith Hurd, Coalition Chief of Governmental Relations. Keith, thank you for being here. And of course, Gerald, the manager and co-counsel of the coalition. This is an issue that I honestly have paid close attention to when I served as the Department of Marine Resources Executive Director. A lot of this was occurring, and so it's something I'm familiar with. and really thankful that we've got leaders that are taking up this torch and really pressing the pedal on this. So let's start. I'd like to start with Robert. Unfortunately, this has taken a lawsuit, and so you've sued the Corps twice and had some success. But can you tell us a little bit about the lawsuits and some of the outcomes, recent outcomes?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Jamie, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate that. We have 3 lawsuits that we have filed against the Corps of Engineers about the Bonnie Carey spillway, and so we have lost one, we've won one, we've got one that's still in progress right now. So the one that we won was under statute called the Magnuson Sustainable Fisheries Act. And what it says, when an agency like the Corps does something that's going to damage essential fish habitat, which is basically the entire Mississippi Sound, they have to go through a consultation process in which they say, well, here's what effect we think we're having on the essential fish habitat, and here's some things that we can do about it. So that process just concluded recently. And what came out of that was a very mixed bag for us, although it gave us some direction about what we all need to do collectively. The Corps of Engineers said, yes, we are having a deleterious, a damaging effect on essential fish habitat, but they said, well, it's going to bounce right back, and in any case, there's nothing we can do about it. Now, does this make sense? Where's Mayor Rafferty? Where are you? Are things bouncing right back on your end? All right. So, as Gerald mentioned, let me give you a number, 0. That's how many oysters were left alive in the western Mississippi Sound after the 2019 opening of the Bonnie Carey spillway. And I'm going to give you another number, which is 5. And that's about how many are out there right now. So what the Corps is telling us there is simply not correct. It doesn't match with the data that we have. Now, where do we go from here? You may be actually, Jamie, let me, here's a question that you wanted to ask, right? But, so what, the Magnuson Sustainable Fisheries Act, Essential Fish Habitat, got to look at that, that's great, but where's our Jimmy Rafferty Protection Act? Where's, Billy, did this affect the tourism business in Gulfport in 2019? Where's our Billy Hughes Protection Act? Well, the answer is we don't have one, right? We have statutes that are geared at protecting other resources, but not looking directly at what's happening to us here. And that's eventually, we're going to need some legislative action to make sure that the Corps of Engineers takes into account the impacts that they're having on the Mississippi Sound. Now, let me just show you. Now, this is, of course, the drainage area of the entire Mississippi River, and as you can see, it's huge. It includes the whole upper Midwest, which grows 30% of the world's corn and soybeans, right? It's massively, massively fertilized, and you also have giant animal production facilities up there, all of which, as Gerald said, are sending nutrients into the river, which eventually wind up here when the Bonnie Carey spillway is opened, okay? Now, a little more background. This is the whole Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, as it's called. That's all the flood control structures on the Mississippi River, and the very last one down there is the Bonnie Carey spillway, and that's the one that gets used, all right? And this, y'all wonder, who is this, right? This is Major General Edgar Jadwin. And he is the one that, after the 1927 flood, put together the report that led to the entire Mississippi River and Tributaries Project. And the reason that I put him up here is because even though he's been dead almost 100 years, he is still the one that's calling the shots here, because the Corps of Engineers says, well, look, General Jadwin says this is the way that we are going to do it, and that's the way we're going to do it now. We don't have any discretion to do anything differently, right? So we need somebody to tell them, yes, you do have discretion to do things differently, and there is nobody more interested in flood control, and people sitting up here on this podium, we want New Orleans to be protected. We don't want anyone to flood, but we do want the interests of the Mississippi coast to be taken into account. Now, the other lawsuit that we have going on right now is under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and you saw the very distressing photograph that Gerald just put up on the screen there a few minutes ago. The Marine Mammal Protection Act says anybody, private citizens, government agencies, whoever it is, if you are undertaking an activity where you're going to harm marine mammals like that, right, you need to find a way to try to do it better. You need to go and get what's called an incidental take permit to do that. And so what we're asking there, again, is that the Corps just go through that process. Look for ways that you can operate the Bonnie Carey spillway that are going to have less impact on our dolphins. And again, if you protect our dolphins, you're protecting us. And we're not leaving it with that, right? This coalition is going out actively developing the science and the data that's going to show the Corps of Engineers how you can operate that spillway in a way that's going to prevent harm to the Mississippi Sound to all of us. Okay?
Robert, thank you. Next question is for Supervisor Marlon Ladner. Why is this issue obviously so important to the county and city governments? Why has Harrison County's supervisors gotten involved? And what are the projections? I mean, what are you forecasting as this problem as it moves into the future?
Thank you, Jamie. I think we were all kind of sleeping at the switch prior to the opening of the Bonnie Carey spillway in 2019. We did have prophets crying in the desert, like Dr. Salongi, but we just didn't realize or pay attention to it until we began to see those pictures that we all saw, those dolphins either sick or dead on the beach with those lesions. So, and through the efforts of Gerald Blessey, I think the county governments began to coalesce to say, we've got to do something about this. Obviously, I'm speaking to the choir here. We all know the significant importance of the Mississippi Sound to our cultural way of life, our economic way of life, our whole quality of life. For example, I can remember when I was a young man, and I said this before, of course, I was a Catholic, and at that time we practiced not eating meat on Friday. Well, every Friday we had seafood. And we got that seafood from right out here in the Sound. And it wasn't that we were going and buying it. Most of us was going out and catching it. And I can distinctly remember my mother also buying oysters at 50 cents a quart. That was in 1953, 54, and 55. You could get them at a quart. Now, you could feed a whole family for 50 cents for a quart of oysters, 27 cents for a loaf of bread, if not less, and a little ketchup, and you had a good meal. So I think you all are aware of that. But when the Sound, when we met and formed the Sound Coalition, I think we had a three-pronged strategy. We came up with a three-pronged strategy to help save the Sound. It was educate, legislate, and litigate, if necessary, to protect our Sound. And through the efforts of the Sound, we went to Jackson. We did get funding to support our efforts from the legislature, even though we were not allowed to use that money for litigation. So the cities of Biloxi, the Harrison County Board of Supervisors, the city of D'Iberville, and the city of Pass Christian put up the money to help pay for the litigation at this point that we're having in our effort to save the Sound. We lose the Sound, we lose our way of life. We recognize that, and I think y'all recognize that. Like I said, I'm preaching to the choir. You all know how important it is. So we ask for your support. We ask for groups, non-official groups, non-elected groups, non-partisan groups to get involved, and let's get behind saving the sound.
Marlon, thank you for that. I do have one follow-up question. Obviously, Harrison County officials have taken the lead and said they've even put up money to help support the litigation. How is Hancock County and Jackson County, are they getting more engaged on this issue?
I would hope so. We've approached them. We've talked to just about every governmental entity along the coast, and we've asked for their assistance, and I think they're taking that under consideration. And I think the more we educate, the more we emphasize the dangers of the sound, losing the sound, and this, Gerald alluded to the spillway. That's going to be almost a 24-hour dumping of supposedly fresh water into our sound. So I think the more we recognize and the more we can get the communities and the local governments behind it, I think we'll get their support.
Yeah, thank you. It's certainly not just a Harrison County issue. It's a coast issue for sure.
Absolutely. It's actually a state. It can ultimately be a state problem. I don't know if you're aware of this, and most of you are. We have a $70 million bond issue that the Harrison County Board of Supervisors issued to redo the, not the Coliseum, the Convention Center in Biloxi. There's a $2 tax on the rooms, the hotel rooms, to support that bond issue. And when we lose funding, when we lose our tourism, and when people don't come, they're concerned about buying seafood or eating seafood in our restaurants, it adversely affects across the board. It affects our economic viability as well as our, of course, tourism is a part of that. So it's incumbent that we get this thing straight and we protect this sound.
Thank you for being here and sharing that. I'm going to move to Keith. We've heard a lot about the support from our federal delegation. I think our state delegation's getting more in tune with this. We've got state leaders and obviously our local leaders. But what are we not doing? Where are we missing? What are the gaps that we need to be filling? Is the business community engaged to the level we need to be? How can we do more?
Hello, thank you, Jamie. Well, our delegation in Washington and in Jackson are being very helpful. But with that said, you have to have a plan and know what you need to do to help straighten this problem out. And to do that, and we're pretty much in a war-type situation, it feels like sometimes, and everybody's against Mississippi. We're the solution to everybody else's problem. And we have to make an issue of it, and you have to have ammunition when you do that. And that's why we're funding studies. Paul Michael, Moby, Steve Geis up at Mississippi State, MSpark is putting together economic impacts of what would happen if this continues, what's it going to do to the Gulf Coast, and what's it going to do to the state. Because not only do you lose taxes here, you lose taxes statewide, and that's how we're making an impact on the people up in northern Mississippi to talk about these issues. So you take this information, and to get to what you're saying, you've just got to have more people involved. And then on top of that, even the different associations like the Nature Conservancy and some others in Washington, NIFWIF, have been supportive of what CEPRA is trying to do, which is not in our best interest because it's these diversions. And so we have to educate people to know what to do and not make them understand that you're killing the sound. You're creating a dead zone, expanding the dead zone. So most of it is just, this business I'm in, a lot of people in my business try to make it sound complicated. It's not real complicated. You just need to know people, and you need to have the information to educate them to do the right thing for what you need. And we need to grow this organization. We need more people involved. And to answer your question, no, we do need more involvement from our business community. We desperately need that. We need people to show up for these meetings. We have to be heard. And I'll tell you, I've never seen anything, and I've been involved in politics a long time, and I've never seen an issue that galvanizes a community and a region like this is doing the Gulf Coast. And the one reason I think that's starting to happen now is because of the lawsuit that Robert and Gerald took to and won. And for the first time, I think people started feeling like we're David, and we just slayed Goliath. Well, we didn't slay him, but we hit him pretty hard. We hope to slay him next lawsuit. But what we need to do is just keep focused, grow the organization, take the information that we're going to get from our scientists, and say, for example, you have to know where to be, how to play, and what to get done. So when Congressman Ezell was at a hearing, the head of the Corps of Engineers was going to testify that day. Congressman Ezell dug down and got him on the record saying they will include members of the Mississippi Sound Coalition as stakeholders. We weren't even part of the stakeholders until that happened. So that's the kind of things that we have to work on. We have to get out in front of people and make some things happen.
Thank you, Keith. To your point, maybe it's not as complicated as we want to make it to be. It seems like even common sense that our government would be making sure all the stakeholders were at the table, that they weren't doing more harm. Gerald, a two-part question. Why has it been so difficult for the Corps and our federal resource agencies to protect wildlife and the people of New Orleans? I know they would say it's a balance, and their decision-making process seems to favor New Orleans and it seems to not favor us. But why has it been so difficult for them?
Well, I'll hazard an answer, partly because of what Robert said. The 1927 flood was so horrendous to the Mississippi Delta and everybody, New Orleans and so forth. That law, the Mississippi River and Tributaries Law, was passed in 1928, the next year, and that's essentially what the Corps is still operating under. So in fairness to the Corps, we've tried to talk to them. They basically say, well, if the Congress changes the law, we'll change what we're doing. We think they have the discretion, meantime, to at least do things like open the Morganza at the same time and relieve the pressure. We know that they had, and they still have, the Corps of Engineers have at least 4 floodplains upriver in Arkansas, Missouri, that they could open for the natural release of water. There's ways to combine all those structures that you had in a different method, even using the existing system to relieve the pressure on the Bonnet Carré. The Bonnet Carré is 12 miles north of New Orleans. And so when the water flow, it's the amount of flow past the Carrollton Gauge to avoid flooding New Orleans, they opened the Bonnet Carré. But there are so many structures upriver that could also be opened, especially the Morganza. So to answer your question, I guess the answer is Louisiana has been, understandably, looking out for its own interest. The law does not, until this new act about this study that Roger and Senator Wick and the others did, they haven't been required to look at anything else. And actually, the study for the Mid-Breton, for instance, that Louisiana did, and they spent so far $300 million studying it, ended at the Louisiana line. But, you know, I mean, we all know it's common sense. An ecosystem doesn't respect state lines. I think the answer really is that it's really educate, you know, and legislate. Litigate is a last resort. We see, you know, the David and Goliath, we've got several Goliaths. We have CEPR, which is Louisiana agency, a state agency, spending $15 billion of Restore Act money. And many of their projects, no mistake, are very good. Most of them are very good. But the diversions are not. And so they are spending Restore Act money on killing oyster reefs that were restored with Restore Act money. We think that's fundamentally a contradiction of the law and the Congress's intent. So as I said earlier, maybe the short answer is the Congress needs to change the law. That's a tall order, but that's where we are.
Well, we invited y'all to come to the Business Council meeting. We represent business and industry across the coast. Obviously, we want to know what we can be doing. Is there something specific that the business community can be doing? Are there meetings to attend? How do we get engaged to raise the flag on this issue?
Well, we have a flyer on the desk here with the focus group. is doing a great job helping us start to get public education out through media and so forth. So the meetings, the beginning of the meetings that the Corps is going to have starting in Bay St. Louis next Tuesday is at 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Coming to those meetings, you can also go online and make comments. They're literally saying, what do you want us to study? So if everybody in this room just simply says, well, study the Mississippi Sound and look for ways not to kill it, that might get their attention. There are a number of meetings up and down the river. That's just the first shot. There will be a number of other opportunities for public hearings and gatherings. Senator Wicker has indicated, Keith, when last we spoke, that he's going to work on trying to do a congressional field hearing down here. And when that happens, we'd like to fill the Coliseum. You know, I don't know whether you remember the nuclear waste problem 40 years ago, when we were about to be the dumping ground for nuclear waste, and a number of people, including a lot of our business community, realized what that would mean, and we filled the Coliseum with 5,000 people. And after that, they decided, and the Congress said no. It's really, I mean, public policy is set by voters and taxpayers ultimately. But businesses like ours, those in this room, and the leaders, the executive committee of this, if y'all would pass a resolution saying this is so serious, this is a nonpartisan, all hands on deck problem, and ultimately what we're looking for are win-win solutions. So let's put the best minds in America on finding those win-wins. If you ask them to do it, it carries weight. I mean, I think legislators certainly at the state and local level and other elected officials who are making policy, they all have, almost all of them, I think, have good intentions. But if you say this is something you cannot kick down the can, down the road any further. If I might just conclude, Jamie, speaking of the old days, Marlon, in 1973, 50 years ago, 51, Bonnie Carey was opened. I was in the legislature then as a freshman legislator, and we thought, you know, we're going to do something. And we created the Coastal Wetlands Protection Act, which began the predecessor of the Department of Marine Resources. And it's been studied to death, and 50 years later, it's worse. It takes action. We cannot just keep talking about it and studying it. We've got great science already. We're going to have more. But I think we've just got to say that this is not something any elected official in the state of Mississippi or in Congress can avoid. And if you were to pass such a resolution, I'm speaking now to the executive committee and the board of directors here, I think that would carry a great deal of weight. But individually, never underestimate the power of ideas of individual people saying to their elected officials.
Hey, Jamie, if I could just add something. What we're dealing with right now is we're dealing with the short-term situation, which is the Bonnie Carey and the Mid-Breton. But there's a long-term vision that we're going to have to look at and think about in the future. Like we've already started meeting with the ranking member of the Agriculture Committee to talk about things that can be done in the future with these 31 states. There are different things that's been done. The Chesapeake Bay Initiative, they saved the Chesapeake Bay. When I moved to Washington, you couldn't eat fish out of the Potomac River. And now they're a spawning ground again, as they were historically. There's a Great Lakes were destroyed and killed, and they started a Great Lakes Initiative back in the past, and now the Great Lakes are coming back, and things like that. So we have to look at that and think about it, but it's so massive and so big to look at the 31 states that are involved. But we always have to keep our eye on that ball too, and that helps strengthen our argument for what we're doing in the short term as well.
One thing that we need to also, I think it's on it. One thing we also need to recognize, we do have allies in Louisiana too. We talk about the state of Louisiana, and of course we're concerned about the flooding. Absolutely, we're not wanting anyone to flood. However, we do have allies, especially the folks on the east side of the Mississippi River, especially this Mid-Breton Sound diversion. Folks, that is a killer. And every effort we need to put, every effort we can muster in defeating that. That, as Gerald alluded to, That's almost a 24/7-hour Bonnie Carey spillway pouring into our sound. And so you can imagine if we got the damage for, 7, 8, 10 weeks, I believe, with the opening of the Bonnie Carey. How would you like that type of water coming in here constantly? So you can imagine that damage. So we do have allies in Louisiana as well helping us with this. We were at a meeting yesterday at CEPRA, and they showed a film of people in the eastern part of Louisiana who was opposing the Mid-Breton Sound. And folks, I tell you what, we could do the same thing. The only thing we would need to do is replace the faces, and you would get the same argument that we're presenting. So we do have allies. It's not all lost, and we got efforts from Washington, Jackson, and here locally to fight this. So whatever you can do, speak about it. Public support, it has to be stopped. We're going to have a dead sea out there if this happened, and it's obvious the consequences of something like that happening to our coast, our state, and our country. So thank you. And I did want to point out that we do have some allies in Louisiana. Some, not all. Thank you.
I think that's a great way to wrap up the panel now. I also am happy to say we're right on time. We're going to get you out of here right on time. But if you have a question for one of the panelists, I'm sure y'all will hang out for a few minutes, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer. Thank you all for bringing this to our attention. We've been tracking it, but thank you for giving us more information about that. We will be a partner and continue to work with you.
Jamie, one other thing, if I may. If you want to get on our address list, there's a form on each table. If you give us your email address, we'll keep you informed of all the meetings and things coming up. Thanks, Allison.
Also, the online link, we're going to email it out this afternoon so that they can do that.
Allison's saying we'll email the links out this afternoon to these core meetings as well. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you all very much. Give our panel a hand. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your attendance. We'll see you next month, hopefully.